good. Thanks so much, Anita. Hello, everyone, and hello, everyone who's watching. We're going to talk about what's in your brand name as part of the UACI pit stop. So, like Anita mentioned, feel free to add any questions in the chat. I will not look at the chat until the end of the presentation. So just know, unless there's something like immediate, we'll come back to the questions at the end. And we should have enough time for about 15 minutes or so of questions and discussions, anything along those lines. Okay. So like Anita mentioned, I work in branding marketing. I'll introduce myself here formally in a second. So we'll talk a lot about, well, I just saw one pop in. Okay. There we go. Yes. So, but I always want to be mindful of what we're going to talk about presentations so you know what's coming. So this presentation, we'll talk about branding, naming, but we're also going to talk about parking lots. We're going to talk about back rubs. We're going to talk about private equity and talk about corgis, my personal favorite topic. So hopefully this should be something for everybody. So before we do that, just to formally introduce myself, my name is Mike Plunkett. I'm the owner of Good Boy Bentley Creative, and I work with mission and story-driven consumer goods and social impact companies thrive in a changing world. If you are in business right now, it's either an exciting time or a terrifying time or a combination of both. A lot of change in our world, a lot of change in how we do business, and really branding and marketing, how you tell about your story, how you communicate your product and service becomes even more crucial. So I come alongside companies like yourself and partner with you all to make sure you get your story and your brand message moving in the right direction. This is my second career. My first career, I was a former journalist. I worked for newspapers in Texas, California. I lived in DC for many years, and I worked for the Washington Post from 2010 to 2017. I have a master's degree from the Annenberg School at USC, fight on. So I usually don't bring that up, but I'm pretty annoyed about USC. If you are into Gallup strengths, strategic is my top strength. Actually, strategic thinking is the majority of my top 10. It comes in handy for the work I do. And then finally, I'm a massive coffee snob. So a tip, if you are also a massive coffee snob, there is a program out there called the Fellow Coffee Drips program. So Fellow creates like kettles and coffee makers and stuff like that. If you look it up and you want to get coffee from roasters all over the world, like either really experimental roasters, or if you got something in particular from a particular region or blends or anything like that, they send out a text every Tuesday of their offering for the week. You just text them back. It's a seamless, frictionless experience to get the coffee you want. I'm obsessed with it. So if you want great coffee options and you want it pretty easily from the comfort of your own home and your phone, look them up. So I'll start with the hard news, the reality up front. So we're pretty clear. So within the realm of brand strategy, naming your company, your product, and your service is the hardest part by far. It doesn't even come close. Most people think creating their logo or wordmark is the hardest part. I would beg to differ. People think writing your mission, vision, value statements is the hardest part. I would also disagree with that. It's the name that's the hardest part. We'll cover a lot of the reasons why, but I think it summarizes for one big reason, which is that naming is like driving in a parking lot. All the good spots appear to be taken. So if you're like me and you get into a parking lot and you're driving around, you cannot find the spot you want. It's not close to the store you want. It's a maddening experience. And that's often the case with naming. You might dream up a name. Your significant other might give you a name. It might be the name of your dog in my case, or anything like that. And you go through the due diligence of creating your name, and then you realize someone else has this name, or this name means something that you don't want it to mean. You don't want to be affiliated with that level of brand expectation and connotation. Anything like that. All the good names, because there's hundreds of thousands of names and brands and companies operating in the current moment. And that doesn't even include those within your own category of business. So it gets really hard to think about what's going to be the name that fits my brand, that's unique to me. Now, the caveat to this is that all the good spots appear to be taken. As you know, you will find a parking spot and you will find your name, but it is a process. So I want to step back for a second and kind of explain why it's part of this whole process. It really comes down to, I think, a fundamental simplification and maybe misunderstanding about even what branding is and how your name plays into it. So when people ask me, well, what's branding? I really don't know. Is it a logo? Is it this? Is it my colors? Is it that? It's actually much more simpler than that. I like Jeff Bezos' definition, which is your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room. That's really what it comes down to when you talk about brand strategy. It's what people think about your company, your product, your service, whatever you're doing, the feelings, the thoughts, the emotions, the descriptions that you want people to think about it when you're not there, because you can't be in every single room and you can't be there all the time. So your brand has to do the work for you. Now, this statement makes branding then seem pretty simple. And by simple, I mean easy. And as you know, it's nothing but easy. What that doesn't take into account is the very comprehensive nature of branding, because your name is part of your overall business strategy, it's part of the brand strategy, and the company and product values. So when we say simplicity, simplicity is the finalization of all the complexity that comes together. It does not mean it's easy. And so when people think naming their company is easy, I'm afraid they got another thing coming. So it comes through in a lot of different ways. I want to stop and talk about brand architecture for a second, because this is really important. And this is a clear example of why this could be a very comprehensive and laborious process. So if you know about brand architecture, forgive me for going over this. I'll explain why this matters in terms of naming. I'll just give you a very quick summation. So when you're thinking of brand architecture, a master brand and secondary brands, it'll fit under one of four categories. So I'll start from my left, from a singular brand. You'll have what's called a branded house, which basically means one master brand, and those brand attributes control every aspect of the company. So FedEx is a great example. You have FedEx Ground, FedEx Freight, FedEx Office. That master brand is the main brand attribute for all the divisions, all the products, and all the services. It fits under one corporate umbrella brand. So FedEx is the brand, that is the name. Then you have what's called sub-brands. Sub-brands augment and they connect to the master brand, but there's a little bit of autonomy with them. Virgin's a great example. Sir Richard Branson created an amazing brand with Virgin. If you know the brand, hip, viable, everything going on. Those naming conventions and brand attributes go to every single thing, whether it's Virgin Hotels, if you're old school like me, Virgin Records way back when, Virgin America, if you ever flew that way back when, things like that. There's a little bit of brand autonomy with those individual groups and divisions and products, but it mostly is fixed under the master brand. Then next to that is endorsed brands. This is when you have a master brand and the brand attributes that really endorse a secondary brand, but that secondary brand also is its own brand and naming convention. You'll see this a lot. Marriott's an example, Hilton, a lot of companies do this. Corridor Marriott, Residence Inn, Fairfield, so forth and so on. Those have their own individual naming convention and brand attributes, but it's endorsed by the master brand. In tech in particular, you'll see this a lot with companies that are named powered by name. The powered by is the master brand. They are endorsing the secondary brand. And then finally, if you have separate brands, you have what's called a house of brand, which is a company that oversees a set of standalone brands. You see this a lot with massive holding companies. A lot of private equity firms do this. I work in a lot of consumer goods, so Procter & Gamble comes up a lot. Unilever comes up a lot. Procter & Gamble is its own master brand and has its own distinct variation, but it doesn't really, those attributes don't affect the individual brands the product wants. So Gillette, Bounty, Pampers, Dove, so forth and so on. So it just really depends on how things go. But as this comes to naming, this is important that you have to start to think about these things now, because the reality is that your brand and your name does not exist on its own. Whether you want to create new products down the line, if you want to add a new service down the line, if you want to acquire companies down the line, or you want to be acquired by a company, you want to have an exit down the line, your brand and naming will play a significant role in how that works out. So in some variation, you're going to fit within this relationship. So at the end of the day, as you can kind of tell from the Jeff Bezos statement, it's really about relationships. And that naming is an aspect of that relationship. So you will have a relation with another business as you have a relationship with your customers, with your audiences, with your employees, so forth and so on. All this to say, when people look at this, they think, oh, this is pretty straightforward and simple, but this undergirds a very comprehensive and what can be a very hard process of figuring out the right name for your company. Okay, so like I said, I work with a lot of consumer goods and social impact companies, and especially the new ones come in, God bless them. I think they're doing the Lord's work in a lot of ways. But usually the first thing that comes to mind is, I want my brand to be iconic. I want my brand to be amazing and known the world over. It wants to be special. I want my brand to be like Coca-Cola. I want my brand to be like Nike. I want my brand to be like Apple. And I will sit there in these meetings and presentations, smile and nod, and tell them, unfortunately, that brand was not born iconic. It was made iconic. In the case of Coca-Cola, it's taken over 100 years for that brand to become an iconic brand. Years and years and years of dedicated brand strategy and work to make it so. And what I also tell people is that the name that you know to be iconic probably wasn't the first name of the company. And so you see that here in these four examples. So I'll start from the left. Oracle Cerner, so Cerner, based out of Kansas City, health records and stuff like that. Their first name was PGI and Associates. So that was named after their founders, Neil Patterson, Paul Gorup, and Cliff Illing and Associates. Many people use founders' names as their initial name. Pretty common. Makes sense. As they grew, they realized that name did not fit their brand and what they're trying to accomplish. So they came up with the word Cerner, which is a derivative of the Latin word for to discern. Now, what's interesting about this situation is if you are in the health tech space, you know that Oracle purchased and acquired Cerner 2020, I believe, so a couple of years ago, as part of their expansion into the health tech space. So originally, it was going to be part of a house of brands idea. Oracle would be the master brand, Cerner would be underneath it. But then Oracle changed its mind and got rid of the Cerner brand and rebranded that company, that division, as Oracle Health. So it became a branded house. But if you read the news, you'll know that Oracle currently has got some problems and they're struggling with money issues. And one of the ways they're trying to solve that is to sell Cerner. If that happens, there's going to be an interesting discussion about branding and naming. If Cerner becomes its own company again, does it go back to being Cerner? Does it get rebranded? Do you get a new name? Do you do something completely different? So it's a dynamic process. And that all started with their name of PGI and Associates. Next is Nike. You might know the story if you read the book Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. If you want a great book on business strategy, I highly, highly recommend that one. So you know from the story that Nike originally was called Blue Ribbon Sports. It was that name for quite some time. The mythology of Nike goes that one of the associates dreamt that the new company name should be Nike. Nike is the goddess of, I believe, athletics or running. And so guy went to Philip Knight and said, I've dreamt this, and the rest became history. The reality, I don't think is that quite happened the way it did. But what is clear is that when Blue Ribbon Sports rebranded into Nike, Phil Knight hated that name. Hated it, hated it, hated it. Thought it was horrible. But he was convinced that the name represented the mission and vision of what he wanted the company to be. And so they made the name and the swoosh to be what it is today. Thirdly, Epic, again, health tech space. Judy Faulkner out of Wisconsin. She still owns the company, still runs the company. Their original name was Human Services Consulting. Yeah, real inspiring, really kind of brings forth a lot of feelings that you want. Started off as a very basic, I think, academic company out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And as they grew and their ambitions grew, Judy realized that this could be a epic thing. And so they rebranded to Epic. And then finally, Google. We all know Google. And you probably know this story, but Google is actually a misspelling of the word Google or Gogol, which is the number one with 100 zeros after it. So someone misspelled it on the trademark thing and became Google as we know today. However, before that, the company was known as Brainstorming. And then their very first name was called, and I kid you not, Backrub. I don't know why. It sounded good at the time. I think it was the 80s in Silicon Valley. Who knows what was going on? Anyway, all this to say, it's a hard process to find the right name that matches the brand of your company. It may take a while. You might figure it out quickly, but not nothing, because there's always exceptions. But it really takes time to make something iconic, and it's the work of brand strategy and consistent marketing efforts to make it so. Okay? So there's a lot of ways that you can go wrong in creating a name, and knowing that you're probably gonna have to change your name and think about your brand strategies, it's really hard to kind of get led astray. So I want to give you my guiding principles that I use in my process in creating names. And so this can help guide you if you are going to do a renaming process or rebranding process, if you're going to create a new product, if you're working with investors in particular who are a little worried about your name or want to try something different or the other way around, this will help guide the process for you. Okay. So first off, etymology, which is the study of words, it really, really matters. So you need to think a lot about what words mean in other languages. You need to spend a lot of time thinking about how it sounds and how it's pronounced. The thing about words and etymology is that we're dealing with two aspects of wording, basically. There is the denotative aspect, which is the dictionary term. What does a word just formally mean? But most people know words from its connotative standpoint. So based on their particular perspective, their culture, their ideas, their principles, words mean certain things to different people. So, for example, if you are working internationally and you name a company one thing that makes sense to you within your own context and culture, but you work in another culture and it's considered to be culturally insensitive, you will lose customers and you will lose business partners because of it. You really have to start to think about this internationally. How do words mean? How do words translate? And also how words are sound and how they're pronounced. The mind cognitively thinks about words in such a way that it affects a positive or negative reaction based on the pronunciation of a word. So, for example, a lot of words that end in a vowel, an E, an A in particular, palabra, there's this essence of it creates a positive connotation within the mind. But if you end some words with different letters, it creates a negative or a neutral connotation. It also means the same thing in terms of if you want a word to be masculine or feminine, for example. These things really matter, and they come into naming because they're all part of the invisible scripts that people are thinking about your brand when you're not in the room. So etymology, thinking about it, really, really matters. We'll talk more about this in the next slides. So thirdly, the name to that point can mean something. So you can use the denotative context of the word, or it can be something that you put meaning into. And this is where a lot of the very successful names of brands come into play. They take something from another context, and then they ascribe the meaning of their business and brand into it. Amazon's the perfect example of this. So that's an easy way to do it, but it does take a lot of work to make that happen. Okay. When you're going through the process of naming, you want to start very, very large, and you're going to have to think about words and parts. So the key of thinking about a unique name is that you're not going to create a name that people just already know, like Apple. It's already taken, people know it, and Steve Jobs already did the hard work, so it's not going to happen. What is going to happen is that you pull from a very large pool of words, phrases, all sorts of stuff. And then you start to think about words in parts. What are the parts of the words? What are the parts of the ideas that you can use to create your own name that makes sense? Now, this is also how brand strategy works as a whole. At the end of the day, the brand strategy is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, but every part matters. So every message matters, every positioning statement matters, every color scheme matters, the word marks matter. Those are all parts. Put them together that become a greater whole. It's the same process of which how you go about thinking about your name. You got to pull from a lot of different things and start pulling them apart and see what you have, and then you put it back together again. I tell you this next thing just so you know, so no one gets mad in your organization, you as the founder don't get mad. You are going to have the first group of names, and most likely they're not going to be the right names. What you're going to have to do is you're going to have to test and you have to iterate. And the reality is that the final name is going to come out for the revisions, and it might be a situation where it comes out for a lot of revisions. I had one naming organization. It was a company that acquired a marketing agency and nonprofit donor software to create a new holding company. They wanted to create a new master brand. We found an amazing name for them. We just had to go through 500 other name options, 500. It was really, really hard. But the work was worth it because the name they came up with was correct with their brand foundations, what they wanted to describe. So it's going to be a process. So if you're working with an agency, you're working with someone like me who's trying to help you out, please don't get mad after the first round. Just know that this is a process. And then the two last ones I think are really important, probably the most important principles. Number one, does the name fit your brand foundation? What I mean by brand foundation is the kind of the foundational components that you'll start with when you create your company. So your mission statement, your vision statement, your corporate values are usually the big ones. Also, a brand promise. If you cover brand promise, it's basically what is the thing that you're offering your customers, your employees, your other businesses. What can people expect from you and your business every single interaction with you? That's what they call a brand promise. Those things are foundational. If you come across a situation where you have this amazing name and you love it to death, but it doesn't work with your mission, vision, value statement or your brand promise, then the name has to go. It's a lot like buying a house. You go searching for a house and you find this house and you fall in love with it. It's perfect for you and your family. It's exactly everything you wanted. Unfortunately, the house is $200,000 over your budget. You're not living in the neighborhood you're going to live in, that you want to live in. You're going to have a longer commute, things like that. Often people make emotional decisions about these things and regret them in hindsight. The same is true with naming. If you, in particular, have a name that has a really strong emotional tie to you, those are the names you have to scrutinize the most. Because what will happen is you'll want to fight for the name because it means so much to you, but it doesn't mean anything for your brand or company. And then you're going to have problems down the line. And then finally, have a scale and have a system in place before you start. So you can avoid these really tricky situations where you feel like you have an emotional attachment to this name and it doesn't work for your brand. It doesn't work for your business partners or the people who want to acquire you or your customers or anything like that. Have a system in place before you start, and that'll help you down the line. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about this system. There is a system, there is a way of doing things that'll really help you out. So let me walk you through kind of naming that falls under these main, looks like 8 groups here. So I would say about 99% of names will follow one of these conventions. You might have some weird outlier, but not really. It's really going to be one of these. And again, I'll just emphasize there's no right or wrong group for your name. But what does matter is that if you are attuned to your brand foundation, you're attuned to what you're trying to accomplish, that'll help guide the group that you're in, and that'll help you figure out what's going to be the right name for your company. So I'll start from the top left. So your name could be descriptive, which is clearly state what the brand does or offers. General Motors is one, Whole Foods is another one. If you are in a situation where you need to have people clearly understand what you do up front, your name's going to be descriptive. You kind of eliminate the barriers of entry of figuring out what exactly do you do again. It's clear, people understand it, no problem. Makes sense. Okay. Next to it is evocative. So evocative names suggest a brand's positioning through a metaphor or imagery. Amazon's a great example of this. Amazon, before it became what we know as Amazon today, was all about books. But it really wasn't about books. Jeff Bezos understood that it was about what he wanted to offer and the reach that he wanted to offer. So Amazon River made sense for him. Evocative names can be really good to convey a sense of an emotional connection that you want to have with people. That's the positive. The negative or the downside could be it takes longer then to educate your customers and other business owners and investors and whoever about what your brand and name does. So that will take more legwork to do that if you go this route. Similarly to that is inventive, made up words that are unique and memorable. Kodak is actually a made up word. So those aspects where people can make up stuff and people do it all the time, you're going to run into the same situations as evocative. If you have a really cool name that sounds good, then you have to educate people as to what exactly it relates to your name and the name relates to your company and brand and stuff like that. Then top right is lexical within the lexicon. Clever wordplay, puns, alliteration. Dunkin' Donuts is a great example. This is a good way, particularly if you have a consumer-facing company. I would say this is a good way to go if you want to tell people what you do and what you offer, but you don't really want to directly tell them what you do and what you offer. There is a way that you can find a term, find a brand component that gives the experience or the actual process, like Dunkin', that you can do it. It creates that image in people's minds so they understand what's going on. And that's a positive brand asphyxiation to their mind. So lexical could be a good way to go. So then we go to the bottom left, acronyms, abbreviate longer names to initials, IBM, AT&T, so forth and so on. This is a good way to do this. The really tricky part with acronyms is that in a way down the line you have to build the name convention so that people may know that it's an acronym, but it can stand on its own. So what I mean by that is IBM, International Business Machines. I think if you know it at some point historically, you know what it really means, it stands for. But IBM, they've been able to make it a successful brand, so you just know exactly what it is as IBM. You can also, though, have the inverse problem where you have a long name for a company. One of my current clients is actually a quasi-government agency who's trying to create their a new brand identity under abbreviated name, and God bless them. It's very clear that it's an acronym, and on its own, it's going to be very difficult for them to create its own brand's identity as just an acronym, apart from knowing this obviously stands for something. And you have to then ask people, what does that really stand for? I don't know what this means. Again, pros and cons. Next up, geographical. You tie the identity to a location. And this can work really, really well if you are starting off and the place that you are at is actually a major component to the brand story. A good example, if you like tamales, Tucson Tamale, Tucson Foods, what they are doing there is they're taking the component of food, but they're also then grafting themselves to the brand identity of Tucson. Ray Ray Sonoran Iced Tea does this as well. There's a bunch of Cape Cod chips. I know they just went out of business. May they rest in peace. Things like that, where you're basically in a way taking that brand affiliation, positive feelings, and you're using it to bolster your own name and your own brand story as well. It's a good way to do it. I would just recommend if you go that route, do enough research on the location because as there's positive affiliations, there's also negative ones as well. Next to that is founder. A lot of people do this. That's actually not correct. I will fix that when we do the slides. Founder names are the easiest way to go. It works really, really well if you want to, if you are founder led and founder driven. The thing is that at some point, especially if you grow and scale, that the business will outgrow the founder. And so you have to be very, very mindful of that. If you named a company after yourself or someone closest to you, if you want that business to succeed past you, you are going to have to create the branding of the name that is beyond you, if that makes sense. So just keep that in mind. It's a very popular thing to name the company after yourself or after any sort of founder or anything like that. It's a good way to go often. But if you are aiming to scale, and in particular, and if you are aiming to be acquired, then you might realize that the company that wants to acquire you may not want to have the founder affixed to it anymore. So just keep that in mind. And then finally, compound words, taking 2 or 3 more words to create a new one. MySpace, my personal favorite, or Facebook. This happens all the time. This is an easy way to create a new name from parts of words that makes sense. Okay. Again, most of your naming will fall under these conventions and categories and groups. And this just kind of gives you a starting point when you're going through the process to know what you're looking at and how you can go about it. Okay. So then we go to scales. I'm going to show you 2 different scales. This one is like universal scale. If you work with any sort of agency or creative professional like myself, they will give you some variation of this scale. These are the common naming attributes that people are looking for when you're looking to create a new name, brand, or rebrand or something like that, so people understand what's going on. And you could always adjust this as you see fit, but these are pretty much common attributes. So number 1 is the name memorable, especially when you're early stage and you're in a crowded field. Like I said, I work with a lot of CPG, and then you have a lot of folks who are commodity, coffee, for example, pasta, things like that. Name memorability is a crucial, essential, otherwise you will get lost very quickly. I would say this is also the case for AI-driven companies. You have to think about how your name's going to be memorable as well. So it has to be really a key component. Does your name sound good and does it look good? There are some names that when you try to create a brand word mark for it, you look at it and you're like, no way, this ain't going to happen. This doesn't look right. It has to be, you have to create a positive affiliation in your customer's eyes, or otherwise people are just going to turn off. It's just the way it works. Is it brave? So bravery, when it comes to naming, often means there has to come to a point where you have to change the name from PGI Associates to Cerner. As much as PGI and Associates, or if you do some sort of name like that, makes sense when you start off, you will get to the point that people will look at that and go, "Oh, that's pretty safe. That name's pretty safe," which means that company's pretty safe. If I'm trying to look for innovators, do I want to go with someone who's safe? I don't know. It creates barriers of entry for your potential customers, and particularly as you scale. So if you are in a space that innovation is expected or cutting edge technology or something like that, then your naming has to be pretty brave to match that. And then conversely, is it easy to say? Again, names are difficult to say. That may mean something specific to you. In particular, you don't want to get into a situation where if you pronounce a certain way, it means something unsavory. You don't want to do that. I also forgot to mention, I was going to point this out to you. Here's a good tip for you. If you're going through your names and you want to know if there's another connotation to it, I'd recommend you go to Urban Dictionary, still a thing, urbandictionary.com, type in the name. If nothing comes up or you don't mind what's been said about the name, you are good to go. If something comes up and you're like, I don't want to be affiliated with that, then you're going to need to try a new name. That's where pronunciation and connotation comes into play. Is the name unique to your competitors? We'll talk a little bit more about this. You don't have to think about whether your name is unique to anyone in the world. That's just not possible. But your competitors in your category, you absolutely do. Does it speak to the benefits? This can be tricky, particularly for a tech company, because we're now running into a situation where many companies want to name their name some derivative of AI. So there's a company called magicschool.ai. They do school software, or there's other AI companies. You have to think about, does those things speak to the benefits other than just AI? Because you're probably going to now, if you're in the AI space, you're going to run into the fact that everyone is AI driven, AI powered, AI something. So then what's the other benefits you want to talk about? And can your name talk about that? Is the name 2 syllables or less? I would say from terms of pronunciation, if your name could be 3 syllables or less, I think you're in a pretty good spot. But the really common names are pretty good. Apple, Epic, Coca-Cola. I mean, that's 4 or 5. But again, it has to be able to be easily pronounced. People can understand it. Once you get past 4 or 5 syllables, and once you get past more than 1, maybe 2 words, if your name is one very long word or it's like 3 words, you're probably going to have to change your name because a lot of people will not be able, it's not going to register in people's minds to do it. The only exception is fashion. Fashion, longer names actually work better, but that's because there's another different brain differentiation system that's happening when it comes to fashion. Okay, because longer names equal elite status, but that's different. Okay, and then finally, does your name tell a story? So storytelling, I know, is all the rage, keeps me employed, so I'm really happy about that. The way you tell your brand story will take on a lot of different forms. Really, I would look at it more as, does your name start the story for you? So, for example, if you're a founder company, you name the company after yourself. Obviously, the start of the story is you. And so then you talk about your brand strategy as, I created this company because I'm solving for X, Y, and Z. I've noticed my customers have this pain point, that pain point. This is the value, and this is the benefits I want to bring to the world. So forth, so on. There's your story. Could be a situation of, if you have another name, there's a company that is doing hummus. They're called Hummus Goodness. And their story is that we love hummus and there's a lot of good hummus in the store, but it doesn't make me feel good. Either I feel like this is a chore or it doesn't taste right or anything like that. So we want to bring goodness into the world. Therefore, our brand name is called Hummus Goodness. Okay. Things like that. That's where the story takes place. And so it's kind of your chapter 1, if you will. Okay. So this is kind of the universal scale. So this is scale 1. Then there's another scale that you'll have to create. And this is the scale that works for your company specifically. So this is from one of my recent projects. They are creating an app for people who read the Bible, for example. So they wanted to do things that's a little bit different. So these are things then that are unique to you, and your naming has to work with this. So in their case, did it speak to a system of tools or a systemic function? They want to be able to create a suite of tools so that can it work as end-to-end systems, or do you have to kind of create a naming convention for every single thing you do? Uh, does the name have indirect educational component? A lot of them are very interested in literature, so the name come from literature because the people that they're attracting for are readers, and so this will have a positive affiliation with that. It can be accessible within a school, a distinct sense of safety, distinct sense of purpose, be smart but not tacky. These are all things that'll have to matter to you as you're working on your brand strategy, but I would highly, highly strongly encourage you to put this system into place and write it down because and make sure you incorporate it because you're going to think about your brand name and you're going to be like, something's not right about this name. Something's not right about that name. I can't quite put my finger on it. And what you're probably saying to yourself is, it's because this name sounds tacky to me. But I don't want to be the one to say, this is tacky and I don't want tacky names. I would encourage you, just put down as a thing. I don't want a tacky name. It'll help you out in the long run because you need to be able to weigh what you're feeling and what you're thinking about your name versus the system that you created for yourself. Okay. So you'll have a universal scale, but this is things that that are important to you in your business. So then I want to add a couple more tips and tricks. So the name needs to work now and into the future. Trendy is really hard. Trendy changes so fastly, especially in our day and age, and it can very easily become irrelevant. So try to be as timeless as you possibly can. Your name needs to be ownable and trademarkable. Trademarks can be really tricky. In the United States, it takes a long time to do a trademark, and this also plays in the category. There are some things that you'll be able to trademark. There are other things you cannot. So Oracle Health, for example, Oracle can trademark Oracle. You cannot trademark health. For example, you cannot trademark AI. That's just a common name. It's a common qualifier. Can't do it. So you have to think about what aspect of your name can you trademark that is truly yours. It used to be that URLs, the gold standard was .com and .org. And so if you found a name that worked with the .com or .org, then it means you were good to go. That still sort of matters, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good name for your company. There's a lot of ways you get around that. A lot of people do their name .co. That's a very popular thing still. So that's one element, but it's not the whole element. But I will say to all of this is the most important, is you have to think within your category. So what I mean by that is you're not going to, like I mentioned earlier, you're not going to have a name that's unique to just you and the entire world. It's not going to happen. And it's just not how people think. How many companies are named Apple in the world today? A lot, actually. But within their category, they're able to be the name Apple because they're not competing with Apple because Apple is in its own category. So if you work in the health tech space, for example, you have to think about how does your name fit in relation to your competitors within the category. Consumer goods, same thing. Nonprofits, same thing. Social impact as well. So think category because that's really where you'll find your space, where you're going to find your parking spot. Okay. So I want to end with one quick story about naming, and then we'll open it up for questions. Okay. So I was hired on by an agency to help a company that was called Collaborative Imaging come up with a new name. This is the final name that they come up with. I don't know if you come across them. They're called Civi. They work with radiology. It's end-to-end AI-powered radiology operation stuff. And so they had the name Collaborative Imaging, not the greatest name. They were looking to rebrand. They felt like they had enough traction and scale that they wanted to be able to convey the emotional sense of helping radiologists, but also be much more in tune with what they were offering with their line of products and services. Okay. So we started working on this project, did a full rebrand, came up with the reality that their brand essence, very similar to a brand promise, was the sense of agency. And what I mean by agency is that you have the ability to live your life well, or you have the ability to run your radiology practice the way you want to. Civi at this point, or Collaborative Imaging, wanted to help people avoid burnout, a lot of burnout in the medical field, and a lot of it because of administrative burden. They want to ease that. It gives that sense of agency to give people this sense of their practice back. So the branding and their new name had to match that. So we began through the branding process and went through a very extensive process. So this is a little hard to see, but this is part of the boards that we did for all the naming conventions. There's over 200 here. I don't think I included all of them. So you can see think tanks for names, parts of names, different derivatives, all sorts of stuff. You can see we looked at combinations. If we put this name with this name, what comes up with this? All sorts of stuff. We eventually ended up with 6 names. Uh, you can see a couple of them. Agency, which is a former agency. Foresight, because having foresight, strategic direction was a part of it. So we had a derivative of that, but that one got banned because I think it was the CEO or someone else hated the Foresight saga from BBC. If anyone's watched that, so the name went. I mean, it could really be as petty as that. That's how this happens. So we end up ultimately with the name Torio. Torio was a derivative of the Greek name for agency. It's proctorial, proctorea. So Torio, and then we had the qualifiers Torio Health Systems, was the winner. And that was the name that we were going to go with. So everyone liked it. We were moving forward. We started designing a new word mark. Everything was moving, had the brand in place. But then private equity called. So an equity firm gave them a call and said, "We love what you're doing. We're interested in acquiring you." So I will put this into play here now. When we started working with them, AI was not as much of a thing as it is then. I mean, we're looking at 18 months and how much it's changed. When they talked with us, they didn't want to emphasize the AI component. They wanted to emphasize the agency component and how these products will help their system. But as then still collaborative imaging was working, they realized that they were going to have much more competitive advantage if they started building their own AI tools instead of using other ones. And so that changed their whole business structure and positioning and it put them in favor with a private equity firm. So instead of leaning away from AI driven, they decided to build their own tools and become an AI driven company. So the private equity firm that was attracted to them loved that, loved what they were trying to do, loved their position with independent radiologists and their space within health tech. They didn't like their brand and they didn't like Torio because they didn't want to talk about agency anymore. They wanted to talk about AI. So collaborative imaging had a problem. Either we can keep the new brand or we can get acquired and move forward. I think you know what happened. So they changed their position to meet the demands of the acquisition. So what they had to do then is they had to find a name of something that would work. At this point, Collaborative Imaging had a suite of projects. One of them was called Civi, which was their scheduling kit. So the private equity firm and them decided, well, if you're going to completely change, we still want something that's inherent within your own brand story that people will know that we can build upon. Hence, Civi. So 1 year's worth of work, gone. And it took them about another 6 months to rebuild that brand to create Civi to what it is today. So what I learned from that and what I share with you as we close is that particularly if you're a healthcare company or if you're a tech company, your qualifier is really going to matter. Are you health? Are you health systems? Are you healthcare? Are you product.ai? Are you something else? Again, this comes back to category. That's how people know who you are, and that's what builds upon your name. Secondly, you have to be able to tie your name to the cost, your time to seed, to raise money, the ability to gain recognition, how the name works for the company, especially for potential investor or buyers. So you have to think about the timing of it, how it works. And then you have to be able to pivot very, very, very quickly. Because if you have a private equity firm or you have an acquisition that needs you to change quickly, otherwise it's going to fall through, you're going to have to work very quickly to get that done. Thirdly, this happens more than you might realize, but your real brand name that you end up with can be inherent with the brand you created, so you need to honor that. It often happens that what people decide is inherent within something they created way back when, something they wrote down, and they kind of put it away and they're like, I'm not really sure about this, but it might be inherent to the brand story. It might be correct. So if that is the case with that, you need to honor that and use that as your name. And then finally, and this is an important point, I think it gets lost with people when they think about growth and scale. As you get bigger, as you grow and scale, your operations, your product offerings, your services might get more complex, but your brand and your name gets simpler. Again, I'm not saying simple equals easy. What I'm saying is that simple equals you're able to bring all the complexities into one simple idea. So if you think about the biggest companies out there, and as they've grown, and you think about their brand, Apple is a good example. At its very core, Apple's a very simple brand. The very simple brand promise, very simple strategy, the name, the logo, the style, everything very simple. Same with Epic, very simple. Google, very simple. So as you get bigger, it's going to get simpler. But the way you get to this level of simplicity is by going through the process and doing the work. Okay. So if you are interested in any sort of help, or if you just want a kind, unbiased perspective, you can find me at gbcreative.com. Here's the code for my LinkedIn profile. Connect with people on LinkedIn. Happy to talk. Thank you so much. I wish you the best of luck in your naming conventions and the whole process and journey. And so I will now open it up for questions if anyone has any.
If I would have clap. I know we don't clap on Zoom, but Mike, that was a fantastic session. It's been one of my pet peeves, and I think Susan for a long time. And I really like how you went through all the steps, all the effort. And I'm really curious to hear what Susan has to say. But we've been on this soapbox for a while, and I just really appreciate that you're highlighting that it takes time and effort to do this right.
Mhm.
And I do have one quick question,
Yeah.
and that really is, you said that the name may change, right, at some point as you get bigger and all that, and you went through all those things. So, what is the balance between just, plopping down a name that's available, working with it, until you get to some sort of a milestone and then maybe you change it later versus spending time and effort now to get something, more decent and then, maybe still having to change it. Do you have any insight, tips, tricks?
Yeah, I would say generally speaking, there's two camps, and Anita, you've outlined the two camps. Camp one is just put something out there. It's kind of like a minimal viable product, and that's how you treat your name. And
Mm.
then you'll get to a point of traction within your business where you realize, okay, this is the work we now need to do. There's pros and cons to that. The pro is you just get out there. And that the big pro for that in particular is if you actually want people to know about your product first before they know about your brand, which I know seems a little weird, but like if you have a very innovative product, then if you're just PG and I and Associates or something like that, something really innovative. What they did originally was they put more emphasis on their first main product, PathNet, I think is what it was called, which is again horrible name, but that's how they did that because they want to put more of the emphasis on the product itself, and then that informed the brand name. So if doing that, you can just kind of call yourself whatever, and then it'll work. But the cons are if you don't do the work now, you're going to do it later. So there's that. I would say if you have honed in on your customer base early, you have a pretty clear sense of where you're going to land within the market, and you have a pretty good sense that you know your product is going to succeed on the forefront. Then put the effort in to get the name right at the very beginning, because if you're an early success and you hate your name, it's really hard to change it. Really, 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 really hard. So if you know you're gonna be successful up front, do the work up front. If you know it's gonna take some time, you might have some leeway and you can figure out your name later. That's
And
what I would say.
I actually like what something else you brought up is the name of the company versus the name of the product, which
Yeah.
addressed a little bit earlier with the house of brands and the branded house. And we see that, right? We have companies, they have a company name, and they have a product name. So it's
Yeah.
definitely, all of those need thought. So any questions from the audience here? Sun Protect, which implies at least to us that it's sun protection technology. Does it sound right, or is it too complicated? So Rafael is
Hmm.
one of our international companies. So they
Okay.
are based in Mexico. They're looking to market entrance in the US.
Okay.
So the name they're using is Sun Protect. Oh, and you're here, Rafael. So if you want to
Yes,
answer that,
yes, I'm
Mike.
here.
Cool. So is your name too complicated is what your question is.
Yeah.
I mean, my first thought is what exactly are you protecting from the sun? So that's what you're gonna have to offer. So because with that, it's something along the lines of you can very easily run to sunscreen issues. I mean, sun protection is I get the benefit to a certain extent, but it might be a situation where you have to think about what's the feature. Like what exactly are you trying to protect? So are you trying to protect buildings? Are you trying to protect individual software? Things like that.
Okay.
The things that I will say, the things about weather related is consumer products will get weather from Thompson water seal, for example. Like if you're like, kind of protecting your deck. If your consumer product is really simple and specific, you can be descriptive like this because then it's inherent like, okay, I'm protecting my deck. And so I'm going to use Thompson water seal because it seals from the water. That makes sense. If your product is a little more complex, like you're protecting something from the sun, but you have to talk more about what that means, I think you can still use the sun part. It's probably the protect tech that you're going to have to change.
Okay, got it. Because we do window
Okay.
tinted. Yeah, and it's instead of being like a plastic base, it's sort of like painting base.
Yeah.
So it's transparent. So for us, at least here in Mexico, we have had like a lot of troubles with the name and actually explaining
Sure.
the product and then the company. So with this presentation, I was thinking that maybe the name is way too complicated and
Yeah.
it needs to, maybe change it or
And I
to
would
like
say
educate.
understandable. Yeah. And I would say that if you're protecting Windows, I think the name tech will throw people off because tech often means software for a lot of
Okay.
people. So it is technology, but it's when you say tech in the way that you have it, people are going to go to is this AI. That's just how it is in this
Okay.
day and age. So
Got
just
it.
something to keep in mind as well. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
Awesome. And then Jeff, I saw your hand up. There you go.
Yes,
Go
you
for it.
did. How are you guys today?
Good.
Good, good. You don't want to see me on camera, so I'm not even going to do that to everybody.
Okay.
So, our company is Lifespan Digital Health,
Okay.
and we help healthcare organizations protect their workforce with predictive insights that prevent burnout and strengthen performance.
Okay.
But we've changed since the inception of the company. At the beginning, when I envisioned Lifespan, we were dealing with a neurodiverse population, specifically high functioning adolescents with autism.
Okay.
And we were going to have solutions that went from early detection as an infant to lifelong living and independent living as an adult. So across the lifespan of that person. It
Okay.
no longer applies there. And so you would definitely recommend down the line or as soon as possible to investigate changing the branding. Susan, you're in this too.
Um, it, it would require going through the process and because you already have some traction, I would do a lot of market research. I will tell you up front, I get the lifespan part. Where I think actually you might have some confusion is digital health, because digital health is such a broad qualifier now that it means a lot of things to a lot of people. And the digital health realm has become so diffuse that that's where you can lose people. So lifespan digital health, like my mind goes to, is this a pacemaker for older folks? Is it anything like that? So there's a lot of ways that can go. So you can think about your name, but I would also think about your category. So is there a better category qualifier that could then bolster lifespan if you want to keep it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, because I have a list of about 50 or 60 names that I've been looking at over the past few months. Some AI generated and putting them in different categories of wellness or predictive. Is it AI? What are those? And so, when we get to that point, I'll sit down with Susan and the rest of the team and our early stage investors and start, going through that to see if rebranding is necessary right now. But for me, it is because I've been uncomfortable that it doesn't fit what our initial early stage mission was.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question on this one specifically. Would it make sense to, because the company has some traction with that name, would it make sense to then call the product something different? And I've seen that before with our companies, right? Because a lot of times they come and they think product and companies like the same thing, right? Because they're early and it is. But then a lot of times what happens after, some time, they go like, oh yeah, this is the company. We have this one product and we're going to have another product.
Mm-hmm.
So they start separating that. So I wonder, could that be a strategy for Jeff moving forward, and what are the consequences of that?
Yeah. What I would suggest, Jeff, is have you done a formal brand strategy process? Not just naming, but the whole thing.
In the very early stages, it was quick and dirty.
Okay.
And what
What?
sounds good, what feels good, what we think is applicable until we
Gotcha.
get traction and find out. So no. And now we
Okay.
have the team around us that can really do the analysis and the experimentation up front.
Sounds good. Yeah. What I would recommend for you is if you're going to do a full rebrand, take the market research you have, hire someone like me or hire an agency or someone who can help you. Go through the whole process and make sure in particular that your positioning is very clear. Because what it sounds like is you might have misalignment between your product offering and what's called your brand essence. Like, what is your overall brand value that you want to bring? So go through the process, get to the point of if you can summarize your company in one word or two, like Disney is magic, Volvo is safety, all sorts of stuff like that. See if you can do that. Get that part figured out because that's your brand foundation. That'll guide your name and help you out a lot.
Susan is already on
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
And so we're looking at, so right now for me, Susan, is lifespan is trust. And so those are things that we're looking at, clinician trust.
Yeah. So once you have that, great. That's great. So once you have that nailed down, that'll give you a good North Star to think about how your name's going to fit within that. So do that and then really do your due diligence on your category and qualifier because I think digital health is too broad.
Yeah.